In this lesson, we're going to discuss how to manage uncertainty as a product manager. So first off, we're going to define what exactly uncertainty is and why is managing uncertainty so important for product managers. From there, we're then going to discuss how exactly you can actionably reduce uncertainty rather than simply living with it. And then we're going to discuss how you can manage your emotions around dealing with uncertainty. So let's dive in. So what is uncertainty? Well, uncertainty is a feeling that we experience when we have incomplete, unknown, or imperfect information. And that's basically every situation in product management. If you're onboarding to a new organization, launching a new feature, working through customer escalations, if you're on a sales call, you're dealing with a production outage, no matter what, you're going to have incomplete information. Because product managers, we are taking in all of this information and then synthesizing them into decisions. We're never going to have perfect information. Why exactly do we feel so uncomfortable when it comes to uncertainty? Well, uncertainty is uncomfortable because it carries risk, where anytime we screw up, that could hurt our reputation, our careers, our teams, our customers, our company. And so uncertainty is something that we generally don't like as human beings. We would prefer to have perfect information so that way we can act with confidence. But as product managers, we absolutely need to drive decisions. We can't let ourselves be paralyzed by indecision, be paralyzed by the uncertainty. Because here's what happens. We can only iterate on our products. We can only deliver more and more value to our customers and to the business if we are shipping. Because when we ship, that's how we learn. If we don't ship our products, right, if we're just sitting there worried about all the different things that could go wrong, our product stagnates and the competition jumps ahead of us. And so we can't just live with uncertainty. We have to actually find a way to reduce that uncertainty down to some level where we can actually take action. But there's a myth that I want to clarify. A lot of people think that, hey, well, if I'm in an uncertain situation, I should just act because, I wasn't going to know the correct outcome anyways, right? So I'm just going to act for the sake of taking action. That's not really the right way to do it. Because if you make the wrong move as a product manager, it's going to hurt your customers and it's going to hurt your company. On top of that, it's going to reduce your credibility as a product manager, and then that hurts your influence in the future. People will start to question whether you know how to act in ambiguous situations, in situations where there's a lot of uncertainty. They're going to fear that you're not going to be able to operate under pressure, and they'll eventually start to remove you from situations like these. And that's not what we want to do, because the larger the product scope, the more impactful our product, necessarily the more uncertainty there will be within that situation. But on the flip side, we can't act rashly, yes, but we also can't just sit there and do nothing. We can't wait for it to pass. We have to do something. So what exactly are we supposed to do if we're not supposed to make rash decisions, but we're also supposed to take some action? Well, here's a framework for what exactly we can do to meaningfully reduce the uncertainty that we face. So we're going to take 7 steps. Step 1, we're going to list out the information that we need to make a good enough decision. Not a perfect decision, one that's good enough. Then we're going to identify any of the information that's missing from this list to go make that decision. For these missing pieces, we're going to then prioritize which gaps are most important to resolve. And then we're going to identify who or what can close the gaps that we've prioritized. We're then going to pull together a plan to track down this most important missing information. And then from there, we should be able to make a decision. Of course, we'll go ahead and take step 6 if we don't feel we've got a good enough decision, which is basically we're going to repeat steps 1 through 5 again. And then once we've made that decision, we're then going to set up triggers for when we should revisit our decision. Because if we felt uncertain trying to do this decision right now, we'll likely be uncertain again in the future as information continues to change over time. So let's dive deep into each one of these 7 steps so that we understand exactly how we're supposed to face an uncertain situation. So step 1, we want to list out the information that we need to make a good enough decision. Because again, we can't sit there waiting for a perfect decision. In fact, we kind of can't even wait for a great decision because there's a time cost, there's an opportunity cost to our inaction. The more time we take to decide whether to do something or not, the more our competitors will get ahead of us, the more dissatisfied our customers will be that we're not making forward progress, the more that our stakeholders will wonder why we're not making enough progress. And so we need to make a good enough decision. But what exactly is a good enough decision? Well, a good enough decision is when we know that one of the choices is better than the other choices that are available to us, even if that's only better by 1%. So as an example, let's say that you've got two different choices, right? You can do choice A or choice B, and you're not sure which one to take. Well, as soon as you have enough information to know that option A is 51% of the time the right choice, and option B is only 49% of the time the right choice, you should just run with option A because it's better than B. So you have three choices, right? So you've got A, B, and C, and each one is, 33.3%. If one of the choices becomes 34% or 35% confident, you should pick that choice because it's good enough. If you have 10 different decisions, right, you've got all of these different choices that you could take. As soon as one of them reaches 11% confidence, even if all of the other ones are theoretically maybe okay, you should just run with the one where you have enough information to know that it's better than the other options that you've got on hand. And so we need to remember that a good enough decision is sufficient. That said, to take a quick step back, this framework works when decisions are mostly reversible. And most of the time, product decisions are reversible because even once we build something and we ship it, we can always roll it back if we find it's not the right direction. We can always build something else later. And so most of the time, product decisions can just be good enough. That said, if you're going to be taking an irreversible decision, right, you're saying we're going to, for example, deprecate an entire set of features. We're going to remove them permanently from the code base. That's when you want to take a little bit more time because an irreversible decision, you can't just be good enough. It has to be a great decision. It doesn't need to be a perfect decision, but it does need to be great instead of good. So keep in mind that as we're talking about how to manage uncertainty, one of the things to consider is how easy is it for me to reverse this decision? Because if it's pretty easily reversible, speed matters more than accuracy. You just need to pick something and then make progress because making that progress, you're going to learn a bunch. Whereas if it's an irreversible decision, you do need to take a little bit more time just because you can't easily go back and change that decision. Assuming that we're tackling a reversible decision, well, let's list out all the information that we currently have on hand, especially any information that will help us answer the following kinds of questions. What is the problem that I'm trying to solve with this particular decision? Many times just framing the problem clearly really helps us decide, well, okay, it's good enough, we can move forward. And for this problem that we're trying to solve, who exactly are we solving the problem for and what are the pains that they're facing? Again, many times when we're just trying to struggle with a problem statement, we may not really understand, well, who is the most important stakeholder? And so by clarifying, well, who exactly are we solving the problem for, that itself can actually sometimes give us enough information to go make that decision. That also helps to better understand what does success mean in terms of this particular decision? What does it look like? What are the resources that I have on hand that I can actually use to tackle the problem? What are the kinds of constraints that I'm running up against, right? Like, why is this so difficult? What are the different things that I'm worried about? And what are the sort of risks that I might run into when I'm tackling this problem? And so something that is super helpful is just to get all the information in your head onto paper, because you'll find that as you do so, you'll feel more and more confident about your ability to actually make a good decision. You have a lot more information in your head than you realize. And so go ahead and just get everything down on paper so that way you can see what other information do you need before you can make a good enough decision. Now you've got all the information that you need to make the decision, right? You know that you need generally category A and category B and category C kinds of information. And you've also found that you actually have most of the information that you need on hand, but you're missing a couple of pieces, right? So let's take a step back. Let's reassess the problem. What other information do you absolutely need to have to make a good enough decision? And again, just get all of it down onto paper, right? Like, don't try to filter it. Don't try to prioritize it. Just put it all on paper so that way you can actually go look at them and grapple with them. So again, what we've done so far is we've gone ahead and identified, here are all of the things that I would need to have to be able to answer this question of, how do I make this good decision? You already see that you have a lot of the information that you need, and now you can clearly see, oh, well, here's the information that I'm really missing. Okay, great. From there, looking at the information that we're missing, we now want to prioritize them. So most information is not created equal. Some things are really, really important, and some things don't actually really matter. As you think about the decision that you're trying to make, which of these unknowns are really going to give you the hardest time? Which ones really actually matter in terms of making sure that you've made the right decision? So as you're looking at what are the key pieces of information that you're missing, make sure that you've stack ranked the list. That is, you only have one piece of information that is your first priority, you have one piece of information that's your second priority, etc. You don't want to have multiple things be the first priority because then that's really confusing for you and for everyone else. So really make sure that you've only got one first priority, one second priority, one third priority in terms of the gaps that you need to go and resolve. Great. So now we've got the core 1 or 3 gaps that we need to go knock out, right? Like these are the things that are truly blocking us from being able to make a decision in the first place. So real quick, just in terms of this 80-20 rule that I've listed, what is the 80-20 rule? The 80-20 rule is also known as the Pareto principle, where basically what that means is you can get 80% of the positive outcome by investing only 20% of the effort. And then the last 20% of the progress, you have to invest 80% of the effort. And again, product management is a return on investment game. It's all about making sure that we are doing the least amount of work that drives the most value because we're always constrained by time and resources. So really, what are kind of the 1 to 3 things that we really need to go resolve that will help us unlock the 80% of knowledge that we really need to actually go and make forward progress? And so we've got some key gaps that are on our mind. And now we can start thinking about, okay, well, how are we actually going to go get this information? Can we talk to customers to try to figure out how to get this information? Can we talk to our colleagues? Can we talk to our internal executives? Are there market reports that we can go look at? Do we have metrics dashboards that we can use? Can we run some sort of experiment? Are there surveys? There are lots and lots of different ways for us to get this information. So let's brainstorm it. Let's get all of it, again, down on paper. A lot of this is simply a forcing function, really helping us be really clear and really structured in terms of attacking an uncertain problem. And so now we've got lots of options ahead in terms of, okay, here are the 1 to 3 items that I absolutely need to know before I can make a good enough decision. Great, and I've got all of these different options for trying to learn this information. Now we want to create a plan that is focused on speed to learning. Basically, we want to learn as quickly as we can so that way we can make the decision ASAP. Of course, as we create this plan, we also want to make sure that we identify some fallbacks, just in case our first option doesn't pan out. Because again, you probably wouldn't be in an uncertain situation if there wasn't some amount of risk involved. Then, as you work through this uncertain situation, as you try to pull together a plan to reduce this uncertainty and gather the information that you need, go ahead and share progress with your manager. What's the decision that you're trying to tackle? What are the 1 to 3 missing pieces of information that you need? How do you plan on getting this information? And by when will you have this information? And why do we want to do this? Well, we want to do this because by sharing our plan with our managers, they can share the information that they already have on hand. Many times, the missing information that you need, they actually have on hand because they have a much broader view of the business, or they know someone who has that information and they can very quickly connect you. On top of that, by sharing your plans for how to get this information, they can also suggest a couple of other actions that maybe might yield better results that you just weren't aware of. And so again, kind of they can give you a lot more optionality and they can help to accelerate your ability to find the missing information to reduce that uncertainty. And say that they don't have any additional information that they can help with, or they don't have any other suggestions. Well, now that they know that other people are blocking you, they can always apply pressure to those others to make sure that you get unblocked quickly. Because remember, when you're in an uncertain situation, you can't deliver value. And then that means that your manager is not getting value, right? Your progress reflects on your manager. And so your manager also really wants to make sure that you get unblocked so that way they can move their metrics forward too. So they're more than happy to apply pressure to others in the case where other people aren't responding to your requests for information or requests to meet up. And so now that we've got the plan, we can execute against it. And usually that's enough for us to get a good enough decision. But there are some cases where you get some piece of information and then that new information completely changes the kind of decision that you're trying to make, right? So let's say, hey, I want to launch a new business. I'm not sure which new business to launch, right? And you gather information, etc. And then suddenly you find out, oh, actually, it has nothing to do with whether we want to launch a new business or not. It's which partner should we work with to accelerate our current business, right? That might be a totally different decision. If so, go and repeat steps 1 through 5 again, because you are now faced with a different decision. You're faced with a completely different landscape, right? So go ahead and repeat prioritizing what information you need, looking for the gaps, coming up with a plan for the gaps. But you can't do this over and over again, right? Because time is ticking. We do need to make forward progress or else our teams will stall out. Our customers will ask why we aren't making progress, right? And so we don't want our competitors to jump ahead of us. We need to keep moving. So try not to repeat this step more than once or twice maximum. If you find that you are repeatedly spinning your wheels, it's highly likely that you don't have the right view of which problem you're trying to solve. In this case, you probably want to sync up with your manager to make sure that you're actually framing the right problem to go tackle. And many times they can help you reframe the problem, or they can take away some part of the problem and have you focus on a smaller piece, also that way you can make forward progress. Great, so now we've got all the information that we need to make our decision, and we've gone ahead and made that decision, which is fantastic, right? We're learning from it. Now that we have something out in production, we can continue to keep moving. But anytime we have uncertain decisions, it's likely because there are areas that are quite risky. And so we should plan to come back and revisit that decision as we learn more and as we continue to de-risk the situation. Problem is, we can't revisit every decision all of the time. Product managers make hundreds, if not thousands of decisions every day. And revisiting decisions takes time because you have to reassess the current landscape in terms of what knowledge you know and what knowledge you don't know. So we know we need to come back and revisit the decision because information changes and we don't want our old decision to become stale and to lead the organization down the wrong path, but we can't revisit them all the time. We can't second guess ourselves all the time. So here's how we can pick our battles. We can set triggers for when we need to go revisit information. So the three kinds of triggers that you should keep in mind in terms of setting them up and making sure that you have them so you can revisit the decision is part one, knowledge-based triggers. As you were making your decision, you had a couple of assumptions in mind, right? Assuming that our company wants to go in this direction, assuming that there are no other competitors in this direction, assuming that our customers need this thing. If you learn some new piece of knowledge that fundamentally violates this assumption, then it's time to revisit the decision. And so list out what are the core pieces of knowledge where if you learn this piece of knowledge, you have to go back and revisit that particular decision, right? And once you've got that trigger logged, it's then very straightforward for you to know exactly which decision you're going to go back and double check once you learn a new piece of information. Another way to set up a trigger is to use metrics, right? So you probably have some set of dashboards or some set of analytics. Well, if the decision that you've made causes the metric to fall below some threshold, you probably need to revisit it, right? There's probably something else going on that you weren't aware of. And so what we can do is we can set up these alerts within our dashboards, or we can work with engineers and data analysts to set up these alerts where anytime our metrics go below some threshold, we need to go back and revisit a particular decision because maybe we didn't fully understand all the factors at play. And so metric-based triggers are also really, really helpful. And finally, we can also use time-based triggers, right? We can say, oh, well, I'll come back and revisit this decision every 3 months or every year. The smaller the decision, the longer you can take to come back and revisit it, right? In fact, most decisions don't really need to be revisited because most of the time they're pretty trivial. And even if you need to make a change, making that change is quite straightforward. But if it's something pretty big, like, hey, this is the direction that we're moving the product in, and it's something that's going to be pretty big, right? It's something that's very different from how the company is used to doing things, then you probably want to revisit that decision at least once a month or at least once a quarter, just so that that way you still have the freshest information of, hey, I'm still going in the right direction. And so again, just revisiting our framework for reducing uncertainty. Reducing uncertainty is not something where we just randomly thrash about and hope that we pick some action that makes the most sense. No, it's a structured problem where we look for what is the information that we need, what information do we have on hand, what information is missing, then coming up with plans to get the missing information, and then using that to go make our decision, and then also knowing when to come back and revisit the decision, right? Very structured, very straightforward. We don't want to just sit there and wait for the uncertainty to resolve itself, because then many times competitors will jump ahead of us or customers will be very disappointed with the lack of progress. And we also don't want to do random things because then that's not necessarily helpful for our customers or for the company. And so now we know how to objectively reduce uncertainty. But what about our emotions when we're tackling uncertainty? We have to remember, at the end of the day, product managers, we're people, and people honestly don't like uncertainty. It's just something that really messes with emotions. And so when we have the right emotional toolkit for managing uncertainty, we can feel a lot more comfortable in tackling the objective work around reducing the uncertainty. The reason why I want to talk about emotions here is that product management is something that is very much full of soft skills, right? We need to know how to influence other people to take action. And to do that, we ourselves need to be in emotional control. We need to know how to set ourselves up for success and how to create momentum for ourselves, positive energy for ourselves. Because if we're feeling really stressed or anxious or depressed, then we're not going to be able to rally other people around tackling the right thing. And so it is really important for us to keep track of our own emotions and make sure that we're in a healthy emotional state, or else we're not going to be able to help rally our colleagues towards solving pain for our customers. And so here are some techniques that we can use in terms of managing our emotions around uncertainty. The first technique is to accept that there are just some things that are outside of our control. I know that a lot of product managers tend to be control freaks, right? We want to make sure that we're doing the best possible thing for our customers, our users, our engineers and designers. We want to do the best thing possible for the business and stakeholders. And there are a lot of different levers that we can pull. There are a lot of things that we can influence. But honestly, there are just some things that are completely out of our control. Sometimes there will be global pandemics. Sometimes there will be changes to weather. Sometimes there'll be competitive action that we couldn't have predicted. Sometimes there will be really huge trends. Sometimes the software would just simply break and it wasn't our fault. And so there are just lots of things that are just out of our control. And we need to accept that they are out of our control. Because when we try to control things that aren't actually under our control, we're burning energy. We're not focused on the things that really matter. Because when we try to pull levers that don't belong to us, well, then we're not going to be able to make forward progress in terms of pulling the levers that do belong to us. So remember, some things really are out of our control, and that's completely okay. That doesn't mean that we are shirking responsibility or that we're passing away the blame. It's just that there are some things that we just can't control as product managers, and that's just how it is. The second thing is just to remind yourself that you've survived uncertainty before. Something that can be really helpful is to keep a log of your past successes in terms of dealing with uncertain situations, right? You basically want to demonstrate to yourself that, hey, I've got a track record in terms of dealing with uncertainty. We've dealt with uncertainty too within our own personal lives, within our academic lives, even outside of the professional sphere. And so just remember that there are lots of different things that are uncertain, and we've survived them before. We've come this far. And so it's not something that we should be afraid of. It's something that we've dealt with before, right? We should be confident that we'll survive this next round of uncertainty too. Another thing that's also really helpful is to reframe uncertainty as opportunity. If you're uncertain, other people are uncertain too. And that means that if you can take action and find value, if you can make the right call, then you're going to be ahead of everyone else. You're going to be able to create value when there wasn't a lot of value before, right? A lot of the products out there that are really succeeded are because they tackled an uncertainty that folks used to have. So as an example, Amazon Prime completely eliminates the uncertainty of when will my stuff get here, right? And imagine the folks who were trying to do Amazon Prime the first time, right? Like they were going into such an uncertain space. Well, how are we going to make sure that we can get the products all the way to the customer within that period of time? And how much should we charge them? There are all these different things that they had to deal with. But because they got it right, because they took action when no one else wanted to take that action, they were able to create massive value for their customers and then create massive value for the company and for the company's shareholders, right? So again, remember that uncertainty is just another word for opportunity, and that's something that we should be excited about rather than something that we're afraid of. Because if we're uncertain, other folks are uncertain too, and they're probably not going to act. And so then by us acting, we're going to be able to create value that no one else could create. And so we should be really proud and excited about that. Another thing to remember is that our emotions are just things that we feel, but they're not actually tied to our self-worth. So what I mean by this, there will be times when we feel angry, sad, anxious, but none of these things have to do with whether we are good people. We need to remember that we ourselves are human beings with dignity and inherent worth. And many times we overly associate ourselves with our emotions. Something that can be helpful is to take mindfulness classes that teach you how to observe your emotions and to distance yourself from them. Not saying to suppress them. You definitely don't want to suppress your emotions. You want to still let them come through. You want to feel them, but note that that is an emotion that is here, but not necessarily tie your entire identity to it. So as an example, let's say that you are dealing with a really rough time at work. You have a lot of inbound customer complaints with your product because you're in this uncertain situation where you're not sure whether the thing that you're building is the right thing or not, right? And many times that can create a lot of self-doubt and fear and anxiety, and that can really bring someone down. And many times, these emotions, we bake them into our identity. We say, oh, well, I'm not worthy. I have problems, right? And it's not that. It's that I'm currently feeling a lot of anxiety, and the anxiety is coming from these particular circumstances. I feel this anxiety. I acknowledge that I have this anxiety. What are some ways in which we can change the situation to make this anxiety feel less painful? right? And so by giving ourselves a little bit of distance, a little bit of objectivity with our own emotions, we can then manage it a little more smoothly. And again, the point is not to eliminate the emotion, suppress it, fake it. No, we want to acknowledge those emotions because we're feeling it, right? An emotion is a signal to us that there's some action we need to take, right? Happy emotions means we should do more of it, right? And painful emotions are, hey, we are in a situation that we're not comfortable with, and that's completely okay. We need to acknowledge that we are in these situations, right? We don't want to pretend that we're not sad. We don't want to pretend that we're not anxious. We want to say, I am feeling anxious, right? And my anxiety is coming from these places, and that's completely valid. That's completely fair, right? Like, it's okay to feel anxiety. But let's come up with an action plan so that way we can remove the different triggers that are causing my anxiety, or rather can mitigate the risks that are associated with it. Let's reframe the situation as something that's more positive, something that's less negative. We don't want to suppress the anxiety. We don't want to pretend that we're so confident if we're not. But by taking that little bit of emotional distance, right, that way we can help guide ourselves towards a more positive outcome. Basically, the way to think about it is when you're thinking about, how do I address my own emotions and not tie it to my self-worth, you want to think about it as though you're trying to help out a best friend, right? If you have a best friend who recently, didn't do very well on a test or is facing a really rough time at work, right? They might say things like, I'm so dumb, or like, I am terrible at doing this stuff. And it's no. You're going through a rough time, and it's okay that you feel the struggle, right? Like, here are all of these other examples when you did a really great job, right? And it's just that you need time, and it's okay, right? And so give yourself the grace and the forgiveness that you'd give a best friend in terms of working through those emotions. And of course, not all of this has to be done on your own. It very much helps to invest in a support network, whether that support network is in your personal life or in your professional life. There are lots of colleagues that are more than happy to work out problems with you, whether those problems are at work or whether they're more emotional, right? There are lots of folks who are practicing product management all over the world, and they would love to hear about the kinds of things that you're tackling. In your personal life, right, you have loved ones, friends, family who are more than happy to be those guiding pillars, to be a foundation with which to absorb some of these stressors. And so make sure to invest that time in. Work is not everything that we do, right? Many times work will create a lot of very negative emotions, and that's completely okay. What we want to do is we want to acknowledge that those are there and know that we can go to other folks to help out with handling these kinds of emotions. And so again, the reason why I've spent so much time in discussing how do we handle a lot of our emotions or uncertainty is because if we don't acknowledge that we are negatively impacted by uncertainty, we will burn out. We will have a lot of imposter syndrome. Like, we'll feel like we're wearing some sort of mask where we pretend to be super confident when we're really not. And so what we want to do is we want to acknowledge that we're working in uncertain times. We don't have all the information that we need. We're trying to come up with a plan for this information. And I'm going to do my best to make it all work, but it's honestly rough on me, right? And by being genuine and vulnerable, other people are more than happy to help out because they know that you're trying to do your best. So again, just make sure that you do acknowledge your own emotions around uncertainty and that you leverage some of these techniques to help mitigate that, because the entire point of product management is to handle uncertainty. And so we need to know that we're going to be jumping into a lot of uncertain situations and that we don't need to fake it, that we will experience negative emotions. That's okay. We're going to find ways to address the root cause of them. We're not going to try to suppress them. And by doing so, that way we can make a lot more forward progress and also rally people around tackling the right decision and creating value for our customers and for the business. And so to recap our lesson, uncertainty is a key part of our jobs as product managers. And so it's our job to reduce it to a manageable level for us and for our colleagues. So what we can do is we can get all of our thoughts down on paper, prioritize the key gaps in knowledge, come up with plans to knock out those gaps, and loop in champions like our managers or like other colleagues to help make sure that we are able to move forward and resolve the uncertainty. And something that can really help us work through uncertainty on the job is to also understand how we can regulate our own emotions, be more aware of our own emotions, so that way we can feel a lot more confident in tackling uncertain situations. With that wraps up this lesson.